have Kevin Canty and Lana Marcinich. Is that close?
Marcinich.
Marcinich, I'm sorry. And I'll give you a brief introduction, and then they'll both read and do a few questions. And so think about what you want to talk to them about. Marlene lives in northwest Montana near Flathead Lake at the base of the beautiful Mission Mountains, where she enjoys quick access to the mountains and spends many hours hiking wilderness trails with friends and dogs. In the past 20 years, she's worked as a mental health therapist in a variety of settings. As a natural listener and therapist, she's witnessed amazing generosity and courage in others. She first witnessed this in her hometown of Butte, Montana, a mining town with a rich history and the setting for the Copper Sun. Copper Sky, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Why did I do that? Which is, what I wanted to say, which is available downstairs for sale afterwards. I'm getting ahead of myself. She is Master's in Education in Mental Health Counseling from Montana State and an MFA in Creative Writing from U of M. Her work's been published in Montana Quarterly, Big Sky Journal, The Polishing Stone, and Feminist Studies, and the Montana Quarterly magazine's Montana Warts and All, the best from our first decade. Copper Sky is her first novel. Kevin Canty is an author of 4 novels and 3 short story collections. It's been published in the New Yorker, Esquire, GQ, and the New York Times Magazine. He currently teaches at the University of Montana in Missoula. So welcome to you both.
Yeah, go ahead. I can be nervous for you.
Otherwise, I have to be nervous. Okay. So thank you all for being here. It's great to be here. And my novel, Copper Sky. Actually, you know, this novel is set in Butte because of Kevin Canty. He was my teacher in the MFA program, and I was going to write it set in Montenegro to start with. And he said, "Have you ever been there?" I was like, "No." He's like, "Well, you should set it closer to home." So I figured, how much closer to home can you get than my hometown of Butte, Montana? So I am quite glad of that. It ended up being a really fun, interesting project for me. It is a story of, it's a story of 2 women in 1917, and one is a Slavic immigrant who wants to be a doctor, but her parents want her to get married, so she's basically trying to get out of that marriage so she can study medicine. The other is a woman who works in the red light district. She's a prostitute there. She finds herself pregnant, and she has pretty much grown up on her own, raised herself because she was an orphan. And so she's averted to love and closeness and asking for help. And yet here she is pregnant, and she's like, "Oh no, what now?" So it makes avoiding love much harder. And you know, she knows what an unsafe life her life has been. So she's trying to find a safe home for her unborn child. That's what she's doing. And the book itself is set between 2 mining accidents. One is the 1895 fire. It was a warehouse fire. They were storing dynamite in there. That was a secret. No one knew that. So when the Butte Fire Department went to put the fire out, the fire exploded as soon as the flames reached the dynamite and killed most of the Butte Fire Department. I think all but maybe 1 person. And several of the bystanders. They estimate that at least 51 people died there. The other accident is 1917 speculator mine disaster. There's been information about that in the news this last summer because it's the 100-year anniversary of that. And in that disaster, 168 men died. So you know, at the heart of it all, I was wondering as I'm writing this book, you know, how do the traumas of our lives affect us and the choices we make? And not just the traumas of our lives, but the traumas of our town, you know, and maybe even the traumas that in the town that happened even before we were born. So, and I'm going to read, Kaylee Shane is the prostitute, the woman who works in the prostitute red light district. And it's an interesting thing in that the red light district in Butte didn't shut down in earnest until 1984. So that was like a long time. And so And Marika Lelic is the Slavic immigrant. So I'm going to read Kaylee's second chapter. And she's already gone to Polly May and Coral Anderson there. And that's where she was raised. Coral Anderson raised her. She asked for help. And I realized that's where her twin sister was killed. And it wasn't safe then. It's probably not safe now. So she was trying to see if Coral Anderson would raise a baby for her. But that didn't turn out so well. So now she's going to Tommy Monroe to ask for help, who grew up in the Polly May with her. Kaylee's stomach churned as she sat in a booth at the Copper Tavern, too weak to move. Morning sickness had slapped her in its grip, and the day was ruined. She felt heavy and dull, her belly and chest filled with an oppressive heat. She held her breath against the sour smell of two noon drinkers arguing about the war. The room swooned around her, and she pushed her light brown curls behind her ears and patted the red satin dress against her thighs. She willed herself to get up and walk. Standing should be simple enough, but this afternoon, the sickness paralyzed her. Would you like a drink? The guys at the bar want to buy you a drink. Big Joe, the bartender, wiped her table with a dirty rag and left the table wet. Kaylee turned her palms up in her lap and focused on the smooth skin over his cheekbones. The angles in his face were just right. His hazel green eyes like her own. For all she knew, Big Joe was her father, but probably not. He'd have claimed her by now. She curled her painted lips into a half smile. I do, but I don't. I can't do both, you have to decide. Behind Big Joe, Bert Brown was nodding in her direction. His mining clothes lay in a bundle on the bar beside his beer. His long red hair stuck out from under his cap. His steel blue eyes glaring at her. She shook off his icy look and coughed, her lungs rough and burning. A pang of memory barged through, and she pushed it back. Tell him to spend his money on the shoeshine kids or the paper boy. I've got no use for the man. Not so quick. Beth slipped into the seat across from Kaylee. She unbuttoned her wool coat and dropped her scarf on the wooden bench. Her dark hair swept to her chin in a sharp angle. Since she's in that family way, I'll take her whiskey. Kaylee glared at Beth. Big Joe put 3 fingers over his lips. I speak no evil, he said. You want a glass of soda, Miss Shane? Please, Kaylee said, but we'll pay for our own. Not me. I'll take the man's drink, Beth said, waving at Bert. What do you have against him? He's one of the town's top fighters. He's good business, and he took good care of Lacey Blue. Until last night when she got beat up and left dead. I guess that Slavic girl found her over by the Orthodox church. If you got to die, you might as well die close to a church. She didn't just die, she was killed. Bert didn't do her much good. Kaylee felt the danger, like a traveling mist, filled the room. A horrible shadow stood over her, descended and flooded her body. Pulling her gaze toward the bar, Bert Brown was staring at her. That wasn't Bert's fault, Beth said. She ducked out on him and probably picked up with the wrong boy. They say the motive was robbery. Her beaded purse was missing. Kaylee shivered, fighting against the dark, formless threat that tried to suck the air out of her. She didn't want to think about Lacey Blue and who killed her. She didn't want to think about Bert's icy look. She couldn't afford to think about any of it. She made it herself, Beth was saying. You know the purse, blue beads for her sad days, silver for her bride. Guess what color it mostly was? That's a tough one. Blue? I'd like to get my hands on that purse, Beth said. Not for its sadness, for its beauty. Lacey was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Could happen to any one of us. You have to be careful. Beth fingered the scar on her own face. I bet a guy like Bert, he could keep a girl real safe. Big Joe delivered the drinks and walked away whistling. You going to live at Miss Anderson's, Beth asked? Kaylee shrugged her shoulders. I want the baby to have a good life, something different than mine. Come live with me at Miss Lottie's. She's a good madam. You'll be safe, and the rest will be easy. Beth turned, raised her glass to Bert, and sipped her whiskey. Kaylee pulled her coat tight. No thanks. I don't trust Miss Lottie. What does trust have to do with anything? Kaylee shrugged and stood up. I have to go home. Meet me later? Not tonight, Beth said, looking at Bert. Tomorrow or the next day, whenever I get free of the brothel. Staying at the cribs is dangerous. Talk to Miss Lottie, please. It's your only chance for safety. 2 bad choices. The story of my life, Kaylee said. turning on her heels and exiting the tavern. At home, the winter sun shone through the windows into a tiny pot of snow lilies. Lily picked the flowers and wrapped the stems in a dry handkerchief to protect them. The flowers made her long for spring. Women came out of their tiny hovels in the spring just to watch the snow melt. The red light district filled with laughter and celebration for each girl who made it through the winter. The women fawned over each other's healed scars. They compared notes, sorting the dangerous men from the prosperous ones. Kaylee tucked her own notes into the hidden pocket of her red satin dress and left to find Tommy. She waved to the women and the girls sitting in their Mercury Street windows. 3 tiny children in snow boots dodged her as they chased each other down the boardwalk. Kaylee inhaled the scent of baking cookies that wafted out from an open window. A girl sang a back street ballad, and Kaylee quietly joined in. We'll show them our goods. They'll show us their money. We'll take them for good, but don't call us honey. On the corner, 2 drink runners looked up at her, waiting for an order and a too big tip. The teens pulled their caps forward and tilted their chins into their collars, ready to make a beeline for the nearest saloon. She pulled her coat tight, warding off the cold winter air and sudden sprinkling of rain. Her boots sloshed through the melting snow as she made her way uptown to a back alley and the door to Tommy's gym. A cautious wind pushed her down the alley, the light lane pelting her from the back with a satisfied rhythm. The gym was dimly lit, with no windows, and smelled like old wine barrels and swamping dust. 3 heavy bags lounged next to a speed bag at the end of a wooden floor. The salty air of the room hung heavy at Kaylee's chest. The feeling threatened to crawl up her throat and squeeze her windpipe. A dreaded heat ripped across her belly. She pushed her hands deep into her pockets. It felt wrong, being here like this, in need, and not knowing how to ask for help. Tommy's chest and arms were strong and muscular, with good shoulders. Years of training had made him quick, agile, a man who left the air singing when he walked through the room. He pulled off his unlaced gloves, his face overheated, bright, and feverish. Sweat pasted his dark hair to his forehead. He smiled at her, his sharp brown eyes curious and eyebrows raised. Hooking a towel from the ring rope, he wiped the sweat from his bare chest and pulled on a gray jersey. It's my lucky day, he said, and smiled again, a smile that went right to her heart and made her weak. She looked down, not wanting to see the question in his eyes. One glimpse of those eyes and she'd lose her resolve. She ran her hand through her side curls and checked the bun at the back of her neck, stifling the urge to run, to get far away from him, to get far away from anything like love. Love, that's a good thing for a fighter, she said. Tommy was a town favorite, fast and clever in the ring, and up-and-coming champion. But he was better than a champion. He didn't save his passion for the ring or blow it on useless brows like some of the other fighters. Tommy used his passion to help people wherever he saw a real need. Last week at the casino, 4 men from the coast had roughed up a working girl. They tossed her back and forth like a sack of spuds, tearing her dress and trashing her hair. Her lipstick smeared across the back of their hands. When the bouncer joined the attack, Tommy walked up and stopped the assault. He struck a lightning-quick blow to the bouncer's head and pulled the girl away from the men. She went home with a handful of dollars and a new dress for the bouncer, and the bouncer got fired. Word spread quickly on the line. By the end of the week, Tommy was a hero, and the casino deemed the safest tavern in town. Tommy was good at helping people, so why was she so afraid to ask him for help with the baby, with his baby? He sat on the edge of the ring and motioned for her to join him. A soft shake of the head and she declined. Heaviness washed over Kaylee's pregnant belly again. Her body hurt, and she was afraid to sit, afraid she'd never get up. She handed Tommy the snow lilies, figured they'd brighten your day. I hear you and Bert have a fight planned. Yeah, Bert and I actually get paid for pounding on each other. In all the years he's been gone, I didn't miss him once, not once. He's earned a name for himself in Colorado and California. Boxing is dangerous. People get killed. People get killed doing lots of things. 3 men died in that fire at the Little Miner last night. Across the way, another man was crushed by a loose timber. Did you know any of them? Just the one under the timber, Ted Framer's brother. It's not just the mines, though. Word in the Copper Tavern was that Lacey Blue was murdered. That girl, the one that lives at the end of the cribs in the alley, Kaylee thought about it. Lots of girls lived in the cribs. Pamela? She's dying of syphilis. She went crazy last night and set her bed on fire. Some of the girls and their men helped put it out. Kaylee nodded, then shook her head. Danger like the town's shadowy haze came from everywhere. Town's gone crazy, Tommy continued. If I didn't know better, I'd say it's about to set fire to itself. If that happens, it'll take a miracle to cool it off. Fighting Bert Brown, that's nothing. I'm safe as can be in the ring with him. Tommy had a strong jaw and rough, blunt features. The scarred face of a boxer, a man who safely found his way down dark streets. After his parents died, his mother's friends frequently visited him at the Polly May. The women who visited him coddled him and cooed over him. His mother had been a midwife, and so were her friends. They brought him herbal remedies during cold season and warm teas in the winter. Although none of them ever took him away from the Polly May, they all adored Tommy. Even in the early years, with Anne Marie, her sister at her side, Kaylee had been jealous. No adult had ever kissed Kaylee's cheek or told her how clever she was. No one ever brought her candies or new mittens. Then Anne Marie died, and her world got a lot darker. She wanted to be coddled now and to coddle Tommy, to make their worlds brighter, but Kaylee had a restless, suspicious nature infused with dark habits. Avoiding love topped the list. Still, she wanted to trust Tommy, tell him about the baby, ask him for help. It would take courage. She almost felt it. But courage and trust, the fickle fawns, didn't come easily to Kaylee. Instead of telling Tommy about the baby, she wished him good luck in the boxing match with Bert. Look, Kaylee, he said, a tender look in his eye. I'm thinking we might have something here, you and me. It's a nice thought, Tommy, but I don't need your pity. It's not pity. What then? Love? No offense, but look where your love got Annie. Kaylee hated herself the second the words were out her mouth. In another life, in another world, she might have just let his kindness stand. Or better yet, she might have graciously accepted his kindness and walked away full of joy. But this was not another world. In a way, she didn't understand. Even though she needed it, Tommy's kindness hurt her. Tommy shook his head. Sweat poured down his cheeks. I like boxing, he said. It reminds me that I've been a fighter my whole life. To live here is to fight. Just look at yourself. You think you put it all behind you, that you don't care, but you're a fighter. Every day down there on Mercury Street, when the red lights come on, you're fighting. I need to go, she said, the heat heaving across her belly again and climbing up her chest. The room went so quiet that she could hear the wind in the alley tossing litter toward the street, but she didn't leave. She stood still as a mountain. When she finally looked at Tommy, his brown eyes held an old grief, ripe and swollen with time, a festering wound that haunted him, marking each action for failure. She saw the child he'd been, and it hurt. Have you ever been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he asked. I loved Anne-Marie. I had a bad feeling that day. I followed you two in case you needed help. The snow was thick and you disappeared. I found Anne-Marie. I didn't kill her. You didn't protect her. Cold. How cold could she be? She repulsed herself. No, I didn't protect her. Let me make up for that now. That time is gone. Katie gave him a blank look. Tiredness overcame her, and she wanted to lie down on one of the wall benches and just nap for a very long time. She felt dizzy and lightheaded. Her legs and back ached. A fever edged up her neck. To counter her repulsion, Kaylee calculated her own worries, disregarding Tommy's plea. The girls in the alley and on Mercury Street talked about pregnancy. They had strategies so they could work while the baby grew, eat small meals all day long. Keep some soda bread near the vanity table. When feeling weak, pretend you're swooning over the man. Bite down hard on a fist when the smell turns bitter. Take the top to keep from pressing on the bladder. There were alley surgeons who performed procedures in dark rooms on dirty tables, bound to maim or kill a girl. Chemicals and herbal strategies weren't much better, designed to stop the pregnancy, but often failing. Things like black cohosh, pennyroyal, and tansy were often too weak to end a pregnancy. Desperate women used them anyway. The potions destroyed the fetus so that half-developed child was born, incapable of growing up normal. Some women even used solutions containing mercury or arsenic. These solutions poisoned the women. Instead of children, the women gave birth to lifetimes of tremors, emotional instability, insomnia, and violent stomach pains. The solutions damaged the liver and kidneys and sometimes killed the woman. Tansy, a strongly scented herb, was easy to find and identify with its fern-like leaves and yellow button flowers. In large doses, the oil caused convulsions, vomiting, and death. The lungs stopped working and the organs degenerated, and the women died slow, rotten deaths. Some women took it laced with arsenic, stepping out of this world before the child ever stepped in. Kaylee understood that desperation. It seeped through her pores and hurt her eyes. The world would go on without her and her baby, just like it went on without Anne-Marie. Dying was simple. Living was hard. Tommy was right. Under it all, she was a fighter. So fight for this, she told herself. Ask for help. I'll help you if you'd let me, he said, as if reading her mind. Just beat Bert in the fight, that's all. She looked at the ground, plagued by a terror, that she might tell him the truth and he'd send her away. You don't have to live like this, he said. Yes, I do, Kaylee said, and walked outside to the rancid air. She picked up a handful of snow and pressed the icy coolness against her face. The snow melted and dripped down her chin. Her lungs throbbed. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket and coughed into it. The fever swelled and a deep chill set in. The wolf dog trotted down the alley. He stopped, sat on his haunches, and whined. Come here, boy, she called. But the dog jumped and chased something Kaylee couldn't see. Her eyes twitched, her lips stiffened and stifled a cry. Clouds filled the sky. That beautiful bright sun hid somewhere far beyond them. Tommy closed the gym and insisted on walking Kaylee home, and the wind settled and a snowstorm dropped an eerie white veil in front of them. They hid in a stairwell at the edge of the alley near her home. In horror, they watched as soldiers flung crib doors wide open and left them to hang on their hinges. The men dragged women from their homes and trudged through the early fallen snow, escorting the horses and their children, screaming and crying to the deportation wagons. 5 wooden wagons with their large spoke wheels lined the alley. The horses pulling the wagons neighed and threw their heads as they stepped out, carrying the women and their children away. Snow lit up their manes, turning them white as wonder. More women and children came from the cribs, some of them quietly, their possessions in small bags tied to their sides, and anything extra stuffed in their large pockets. A woman in a red scarf clutched her young child to her chest, cooing softly to the child and petting her hair. As an officer dragged a teenage girl to her doorway, she slammed her head into his chest. He slapped her across the face, turning one cheek bright red, shoved her into the street, and ransacked her crib. With her eyes glued to the crib door, the girl climbed into one of the wagons, spitting obscenities at the officer. Her black hair drooped to her shoulders. She shivered in the light coat on her thin frame. Her red fist clenched at her sides. When the girl turned and saw Kaylee watching the fiasco, she put a finger to her lips and pointed to the signs nailed across the walls. Squinting, Kaylee strained to read one of the signs. When she read it, her heart slammed against her ribcage, stealing her breath and giving it back to her in a beat. A low, soft wail escaped her lips. The sign read, all women inhabiting public houses of ill fame are to be put under complete ban. You're being kicked out of town, Tommy said. His voice sounded edgy, fragile, filled with real worry. In that moment, a strange need welled up in Kaylee, and she leaned into him. In the midst of the storm, he smelled like the solid earth, like salt and good leather. She wanted more than anything for him to hold her close. She let the tiny animal of trust creep out from its dark cave inside of her. I'm scared, Tommy, she whispered. Without something good soon, I'm afraid of what might happen to us. Thank you.
I've been teaching for quite a while now, and I have to say there's no greater pleasure than doing a reading with a former student. It's really a lovely thing to do, so thank you.
Thanks.
This is another mining town and another mining disaster, another time. This is 1972. This is, it's a fictional town and a fictional mine, and the whole thing is based on the Sunshine disaster, in which 91 miners were killed in the space of about an hour. This is set in the town. There are three main characters. One of whom is David, who is a student at the University of Montana, and the son of a mining family, and the brother of a miner. One of whom is Anne, who is a high school friend of David's and is married to another miner. And one of whom is Lyle, who is an actual miner. So we'll start with David, who has just gotten word that there's been a disaster in the mine and has had no further word on what might have befallen his brother or any of his other friends and family. Still daylight when David gets to Silverton, the day that will never end. The streets between the freeway and his house are deserted. The blinds are drawn in the windows. Nobody's home. The driveways are empty. The schoolyard's his house too. When he drives toward the mine up Big Creek Road, suddenly there's traffic inching along. Half a mile from the mine, and people are already parked alongside the road. Maybe there's a place further up. Maybe there's a closer spot beyond the mine, but David parks anyway. It's like a football game or something, cars sprawled everywhere. He walks the long walk up the hill with the others, everybody hurrying, everybody quiet, nobody meeting each other's eyes. The creek tumbles and rushes in its banks, spring full, patches of snow in the shadows of the trees. The mine tunnels lay a mile under his feet, down in the silent rock. A strange scene at the mine. The families are outside the fence, milling around the bridge, or just standing watching. A line of ambulances stands inside the mine gate. Doors open, lights flashing, ready, empty, 12 or 15 of them. A half dozen miners, still in their shift clothes, stand in a circle in the gravel inside the fence. A couple of them are smoking. None of them seem to be talking. Another miner, in filthy clothes, sits by himself a few feet away, staring back at the entrance to the mine. David spots Charlie Kane at the edge of the crowd. Last time he saw him was at the wedding. Now here he is in his carpenter jeans and work boots, sweatshirt under a flannel shirt. What are they saying? David asks him. Not a fucking thing, Charlie says. Where's the fire at? They don't know, Charlie says. Something about the 10 shaft. What about it? I guess the lift got knocked out or something. They can't get a hold of a bunch of them. Bad, David thinks. Bad. The 10 shaft was the main way in or out. He claps his friend on the back and goes off looking for his mother, searching face to face. These faces, blank with fear, not knowing, they look back at David, searching his eyes for news, hope, anything. A stir, and they all look toward the entrance in one motion. David turns to see three miners leave the entryway, blinking out into the gray daylight. Their wives burst out of the crowd and through the gate and into their embrace, the filthy work clothes and the pretty pastels of their dresses, just holding on. If the women let go, the men might slip away again, down into the earth. Then the men disentangle themselves and go to join the other men standing in the mine yard. And the women leave the gate again into the embrace of children, mothers, neighbors, anyone, but not a word, nothing to say, nobody knows. Your good news could be some other wife's bad news. And there were still some number, there are a lot of typos in this. This is an ARC, so there's still a million typos in here. I'm like the king of the typos, so. There are still some number of men down deep in the ground. Nobody knows how many. The rumor says 150 still down there and 75 men out. The miners stand in a circle in the yard, and David knows what they're talking about, drifts and shafts and smoke and where the other men are and who's going to make it to daylight and who's trapped. A spring day, cold. Clouds cover the sun and then move on. Sudden blinding sunlight on the dirt hills of the valley, the green trees higher up, and then the white snow on the mountaintops. It's beautiful even now. My home, David thinks, the place I belong to. It's always winter in the high hills. David's mother is standing with Jordan. Jordan is his sister-in-law married to his brother. And the twins, his brother's twins. And David knows right away they aren't out yet. An awful, bitter taste like medicine in the back of his throat, tears that want to come out, but he's not going to cry in front of these two. The women aren't crying, and even the babies are quiet. His mother sees him come up out of the crowd, and her face lights up at the familiar face and then goes blank again. This is just wrong, unreal, the tattered sky. She takes him into an embrace, but it's awkward, all bones and shoulders. Any word at all, he says? Nothing, his mother says. Rumors. Anything that seems like it might be right? I don't know, David, his mother says. Until we get word from somebody in charge, it's only rumors. Rebuked, he stands away, and his mother folds her arms across her chest again. He tries to put his arm around Jordan's shoulders, but she stands immobile, unyielding, made of stone. No wonder the babies have stopped crying. They wouldn't dare. David can't say why, but he feels it. He knows that under the skin is a scream waiting to come out, waiting its time. Another cry, another group of miners, 5 this time, out of the mouth of the mine. They've seen more than they ought to. You can see it in their eyes. The way that they don't look at each other, the way they don't look at the wives as they submit to their embraces in the gravel mine yard. At graduation, David thinks, the family's all together and watching. Long minutes where there's nothing to see. Somebody has a transistor radio turned to KWAL, but the same few scraps of information just keep coming around. The fire, the mine, the unknown number trapped by the smoke. Then 2 things happen. First, a vent opens or a fan starts up, and a plume of black smoke comes out of the mine somewhere back behind and shuts the silent crowd up and puts the taste of dread back in David's mouth. The smoke is thick, opaque, greasy-looking stuff that rises in a column a long way out of the hillside before it starts to disperse. Men down under the ground were trying to breathe through this. It's suddenly real, this whole imaginary struggle. Here in the daylight, you couldn't know, but seeing this, you knew the panic and the struggle down in the dark. David's father had explained to him the rebreathers, the constant watch against carbon monoxide. But even if you had a mask, this smoke looks like it would burn your skin off. The other thing that happens is that a cry goes up from somewhere, and men start coming out through the gates. 12 men, 24, 3. The crowd bursts through the gates and hurries toward them. David, too, and his mother, searching for Ray's face in every blackened miner. I saw your dad, a miner says, a face that David doesn't quite recognize. Where at? He's heading toward the 12 hole, says the miner. There's some guys still stuck down at 4800. That's what they think anyway. David's mother's standing beside him. He went back in, she says. There's guys still down there, the miner said. What about Ray? I didn't see him, but you know. Know what? This is when David sees it, the size of the thing, as the miner struggles to say something, but he doesn't have words to say. Some big feeling inside him that can't come out in language or in tears or in violence. He starts but can't speak, and David sees it. Finally, the miner manages to speak in a voice not exactly his own. It's bad down there, he says, and walks on. David's mother makes the sign of the cross in the air in front of her face, and David thinks, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. And they moved forward through the surging crowd, searching for Ray. Faces and faces, every emotion, even joy, on the face of a wife embracing her husband, saved. And here is Anne Malloy, and from the wedding dance, her eyes skittering from face to face, recognizing David. Have you seen him, Anne Malloy says. No, he says. Have you seen Ray? She shakes her head no and disappears into the crowd again. A smaller crowd with every minute. One by one, families find their men and leave. The joy they feel is out of place, offensive. The men, without changing out of their shift clothes, though some say goodbye to their wives and go back into the mine again to help if they can. The wives take their dirty happiness home with them, their fear. A rescuer could die too. The word rattles around in David's brain, death. Ray might die, might be dead already. That's the thing he's afraid of. That's the name of this fear. It seems like bad luck to even think it, but the thought won't go away. Nothing happens after that. The crowd, shrunken now with the happy families gone, stands on the cold gravel as the clouds pass by. It's almost warm when the sun's out, almost pleasant, but then the sun goes away and it's winter again. Rumors flicker through the crowd like an electrical current. The lift operator, dead. carbon monoxide, miners tripping over bodies in the dark, a donkey off the rails. They're all alive. They're all dead. I'm going to kill somebody, Jordan says. Ray's wife. Who? David asks. I don't know, she says, and laughs, a creepy sound. I don't know anything, but somebody did this. It's going to be okay, David says. Don't tell me to shut up. Please, says David's mother. Pray with me, please. She has a rosary in her hand, which she hands to Jordan, who looks like she doesn't know what to do with it. Then one of the twins wakes up and starts to cry, and Jordan gives the rosary back. In the gray light, David's mother's face looks old and ill. He finds in her face a new thing to be afraid of. They settle in to wait. A chapter break, and we move toward Anne. It's all a fake, she thinks, a drill. In a moment, one of the shift bosses will come up to her and whisper that it's all for training. Then one of the shift bosses does come up to her, says there's a special place for her. Tears make lines in the filth on his cheeks. He leads her across the bridge, Big Creek running bank full and fast, and into the main yard of the mine where the ambulances wait. This is the first time she's been on the mine property, though she's lived here all her life. She's still wearing her smock from the grocery store, the one that says her name embroidered on her breast, Anne. She'd been stocking pumpkin pie filling when the manager came and found her. He leads her to a small building apart from the main body of the mine that she guesses is the office building, and leads her into some kind of conference room, a big rectangular table with office chairs around it and pictures on the walls. There's a coffee machine too, a giant 50-cup model that some secretarial type is trying to get started. Verna Matfeld, Anne remembers. Her husband runs the filling station. Crazy anger fills Anne's chest and just as suddenly leaves. That somebody could be exempt from this. The pictures on the walls are pictures of the mine, which just seems wrong. 3 other wives in the room, and nothing to talk about, and nothing to read, and nothing to do. This is hell, she thinks. Verna brings a radio in from somewhere, and they tune it to KWAL, but it's the same thin stuff over and over again. Between 125 and 150 underground. Location of the fire unknown. Rescuers, lifts, shafts. It's all a mystery to Anne. She's lived here all her life and never once been underground. She's heard Malloy talk about these things with the other miners, heard the words without quite knowing what they all meant. Now she understands why. She had thought mistakenly that it couldn't harm her if she didn't think of it. Leave the dragon in its lair. Do not call him. Do not invite him. Now it's here, and she knows nothing. They trickle in 2s and 3s. The other wives do until there are maybe a dozen. No children. Everybody else must want to stay outside. At least there's something to look at outside. Somebody to talk to. Somebody to wait for. A man in a suit. A man she's never seen before comes in to tell them the same nothing they've been hearing on the radio. Then leaves again. A sudden, airless, she gathers her things and starts back outside. She needs to find her sister, her mother, anyone. When she comes out into the yard again, a group of men are coming out of the shaft entrance. They look like war pictures, grimy and stunned. They've seen things they shouldn't have. They're still seeing them. A cry breaks out by the gate, and 2 women are running, slipping past the police as easily as running backs on a football field. And they run up to their men wildly weeping and throw themselves into their arms, and the men are weeping too. All Anne can feel is that same bright flush of anger. They get this, and she doesn't. It's not fair. The clean men from the front office lead the miners toward the waiting line of ambulances, but the women won't let go. They're not going anywhere without these men. They're men. Anne sees Penny, her sister, on the other side of the bridge. Her sister waves to her, and Anne walks toward the bridge, but before she can get there, one of the front office men comes up to her elbow. "Mrs. Malloy," he says. "That's me." "Could you come with me?" he says, and takes her by the elbow. She shakes him off. She knows. She's known all along. For even Penny, on the other side of the creek, even Penny knows. You can see it in her face, collapsing like a cake. Anne will not look like that, not while there are others to see. She'll take it home, but first, it seems like there are things to do. One more short passage from Lyle, who, it turns out, is one of 2 men who gets trapped underground for a week afterwards. It's based on a true story. There were 2 guys who lived through it, and we spent a week down there living on dead people's lunches. They find a place a little ways back from the vent shaft where the water comes runs from the rock in a thin stream. The water has been running here for years, and the rock where it flows is a rainbow of mineral colors, whitish greens and strange reds. You think it's okay, Terry says, and Lyle laughs. I don't think the water's going to kill us, he says, and they drink in turn. Lyle feels how his body is grateful for the water, how it longs for food, for sleep, for rest of any kind. If the river was whiskey, Lyle thinks, he feels himself vibrate with fear constantly like a guitar string tuned too high. They sit on buckets that they scrounge from the tunnels, and they shut their headlamps off and wait. There's a lot of crap down here in the tunnels. Scrap wood and broken machinery. The fan's off, the air just sits there, and the heat radiates off of the rock. It's good that the fans are shut off, probably. They might just pull the bad air through. How long do you think, says Terry. Hell if I know, Lyle says. What do you think? I can't really figure it. No, me neither. I can tell you one thing, though. What? This wasn't supposed to happen. They aren't prepared for this. It's going to be a clusterfuck. No, you're right, Terry says. Plus, they don't give a rat's ass about it, Lyle says. Oh, no, Terry says. They sit in the dark for a minute, 2 minutes. The sound of dripping water is the only sound. That and the two of them breathing. The darkness is complete. Even after all the years down here, Lyle still thinks this is amazing. The way you can pass your own hand in front of your eyes and not see a thing. No difference in the darkness at all, just the feel of the air as your hand waves through it. I know a couple guys, Terry says, higher ups, they're not so bad. Ones in hard hats, Lyle says. Some of them are all right, some of them are assholes. I can live with that. The ones in suits, they'll kill a miner to save a dime. Again, the silence. After a minute, Terry says, that's the job, though. That's right. That's the job. Winnie wants me to quit, Terry says. Maybe you ought to, little kids and all. I don't know if I'd do it if I had kids. Your wife ever get after you about quitting? My first one, no, Lyle says. Didn't last long enough. But my second wife, she went back and forth. We both like the money. There's no place else a guy like me is going to make this kind of money. Maybe structural steel or something. But I know she worried sometimes. Thing about women, Terry says, what? The way they worry, Terry says, they never think to worry about where the money'd come from. Fucking kids are expensive. That's what I hear. Pisses me off sometimes, Terry says. Goes on and on about how she worries about me, but she never worries about the other, about how we're going to get by. I'm the one that gets to think about that. It's like she gives herself permission. You can't say she's wrong. But like you say, where else am I going to make this kind of money? No, Lyle says. That's right. Pray with me, Terry says. I can't, Lyle says. Nothing to pray to. I wish it was different. It's not an entirely depressing book. I just read you the entirely depressing part. So.
Kim, will you tell us the title of your book? Because I didn't.
Oh yeah, it's called The Underworld. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a working title, and I was going to name it something else before it came out. And then we went around for about 6 months trying to find a better title for it without success. And so now it's called The Underworld.
Okay.
Can you say how, in researching the time periods of this, it shaped the plots or characters of your stories? I mean, I'm guessing you had something in mind when you started, but things you learned about.
Yeah, I'll go first on that one. If that's, yeah. Sure. I was working in Avery, Idaho in '73 on the railroad, and didn't know anybody who was in the mine, but knew people who were in the world. And so there are parts of this that are about remembering. The old timers from Missoula will recognize, the cabin bar from East Missoula, and there's a lot of souvenirs of old Missoula life in here. And so I knew a little bit about that, and then did the kind of regular stuff that you do. There's a book called The Deep Dark that is not what this book is. It's the actual journalistic nonfiction account of it. It's a wonderful book. I really recommend it to anybody who's interested. The name of the writer will come to me at about 3 o'clock this morning. I'll sit up.
Greg Olson.
Greg Olson, yeah, it's a wonderful book. And so, that, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet. There's, Bureau of Mines, reports and this and that. And then, stroke of luck, a friend of mine who's a big photo collector had all the photographic negatives from the Oregonian photographer who'd been, in on the scene the whole week afterwards. And so I had all the dresses and all the cars and all the signs and all the suits, and it was just, I can't tell you how useful that was. And sort of, and then, you know, I don't know if you ever try to write a historical novel, you end up in a place where you just have to just like put all that stuff in a closet and realize that you've got some characters that you have to move through, some scenes, and just like hope you get most of the stuff right, you know, because you're going to need it for the characters. And I spent the last 3 or 4 months working on this, trying to make the timelines work and trying to make everything, you know, sort everything out to have some correspondence.
Sure.
You know. I don't know, what was your...
Yeah, well, I grew up in Butte, you know, so I grew up with the stories and mining accidents and sort of the nature of the town. And then I went to I read a book called Copper Camp by the Montana Writers Project, and then I went into the archives in Butte, which is this amazing place, you know, you just have all the newspapers right there, and, you know, you could write 1,000 novels, you know, if you could stay there long enough, and tear yourself away long enough, I guess. And then, so I wrote a draft, and then, or 2, or maybe 3, but then, before my book was published, and before I finished writing the last draft, Michael Punk wrote the book Fire and Brimstone, which is about the speculator mine disaster, and it's nonfiction, also a great book. And so it was really easy to refresh my memory of things and sort of check my facts that way.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have a fully formed question, but your disaster is a specific incident, and your disaster is a societal sort of drawn out disaster. So I don't know what my question is, but they're so different, but they're both disasters. Is it easier or harder, or any comments?
Well, I was.
I had a specific
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, no, I get what you're asking, actually. In some ways, I was writing about the mining culture, which so was Kevin. Kevin's book's great, by the way, I read it. So it's awesome, read it. But I was writing about, in some ways, mine was about the town and the disasters and how the disasters have shaped the town. So mine does have 2 specific mine disasters in it, but also all of the other little disasters that, you know, affect the people as they go along.
And maybe we just heard different pieces from your books, and maybe your book does have the broader story.
Well, I hope it does by the time you read it. I mean, it's the kind of writer that I am. I need this specific incident to form a lens through which you might see the world. But I do hope that the world becomes present for the reader. And I mean, part of what was interesting to me about this was to write. You know, you go through the Silver Valley now, and there's ski resorts and stuff, and you know, they're trying to polish it up and this and that, and so it does. I did have a sense that some facets of this world were passing by or were being neglected, and so I wanted to bring that particular world back to life. And so, I mean, one thing I promise you is that every song that's on the radio was actually on the radio at the time. You know? I mean, all that kind of, you know, and just remembering that a different time when smoking wasn't bad for you and you could do it inside. And when, you know, if you wanted to make a phone call, you had to do it from the phone that was attached to the wall of the kitchen, so everybody else in the house got to hear. You know, it's like none of this sneaking off with your cell phone. So it was an exercise in the imagination to recreate a lost world. But once I'd done that, I think I probably tried to see more of that out of the corner of my eye as we're moving through this other incident. So.
Can I ask you about, you chose to write like a fictionalized account of the Sunshine Mine disaster? Was there for you personally, like some kind of emotional hook, something about it that you found really compelling? Or like, I really want to tell this story. It's got, is it the survival? Is it the grief? Is it the trauma? Is it the...
Yeah.
I'm just curious for you personally, what?
I promise you it was something, and I think that the book is an attempt to articulate what that something is. And, you know, in some ways it's like, I don't know, the thing, okay, just to back off for a second, the thing about writing a novel is like you can only be interested in what you're interested in, you know? And you can only write about stuff that you're interested in because it takes too long to write a novel. Otherwise you just kill yourself. So, you know, there's something about this lost world, something about the world of work, something about being in a mine years ago and having them cut the power and being in that kind of darkness that just seemed like a story that I wanted to tell, and like a story that I felt like had not perhaps been told. And that's what brought me to this. And exactly why is I think is kind of a mystery. You know, I think in some ways the book is a way to try to work out what it is about that. So I know that's a terrible answer. I wish I had a better one.
But it sounds surprising. I mean, it's not a surprising answer, right? If you could put it in a sentence, you wouldn't have to put it.
Exactly. If I could do it in a paragraph, I just write the paragraph and get it over with, right? So, yeah. Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I guess I said it, I'm fascinated by trauma, and not just the traumas we experience personally, but the trauma of a culture, particular culture. And, Butte, people die frequently in Butte, and, it's like everybody that you meet, there's a lot of loss. I mean, I can see someone from my high school 40 years later, and they'll tell me they're sorry about my brother who died. And I haven't spoken a word to them in 40 years, But there's this sense of togetherness that comes from that, So I guess I'm fascinated by, how towns shape us, and not just the immediate town that we grow up in, but what was that town like before, long ago. And, having read Kevin's novel and having grown up in a mining town and in the 70s, around the 1970s, I feel like he got it exactly right. I felt that not just that town, but my town, and I'm sure other mining towns probably too. There's a sense of a spirit that grows out of that somehow.
Yeah. It's such a high wire act trying to write about something that you don't have everything in your fingertips. Some of this is is made up, and so you're like, I hope I got it right. I hope I got it right.
Yeah. And that time was an interesting, fun time, 1972. It was like the world was sort of busted wide open, and there was a lot you could do that you don't do now because you wouldn't be alive.
I can also report that there's a lot of really terrible music on the radio.
Can I ask you, did you draw more on you drew on your personal experience of growing up in Butte, but did you also happen to draw from your practice of helping people with mental health?
I did. I've worked a lot with the foster care system, children in foster care, and sort of looked a lot at what it's like to grow up without parents. Even if you have stand-ins, if you don't have parents that are somewhat loving and kind and reliable and there when you're an infant, it's a hard way to grow up. You learn to just count on yourself. So I did, and then I worked with a lot of trauma too. So definitely drew from that. So in some ways that was. I like to say, that Cover Sky is an invitation for compassion, but then you read Kevin's book and so is it. I think most novels are that, an invitation for compassion and understanding a certain world.
Any other questions? Well, thank you both very much.
Thanks for coming. Now get out and enjoy that date.